Well, someone keeping a close eye over this election race is Dr. Deborah Farias. She is a senior lecturer of politics and international relations at the University of New South Wales, researching Brazilian policy both domestically and internationally, and she joins us now on Afternoon Briefing. Dr. Farias, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us today. I want to start by getting a sense or getting you to explain to our audience just how significant this shift in power is going to be for the Brazilian community.
Well, this was, as you were saying, this was a tooth-biting, nail-biting election. It was very, very close. And I think this means, at the first sense, is that Brazil is a very divided country at this moment. The fact that it was literally almost split in the middle of those who voted show that incoming President Lula, one of his biggest challenges will be actually finding a way to reunite the country in the sense of one, and not a fractured country where people who are, let's say, Lulistas, who are for Lula, and those who are for Bolsonaro really are sitting in completely different worldviews. And they really, like, each group really feels that the other just doesn't understand. How can you vote for this person? So the country right now is living in some ways a sense of this crisis, this internal crisis. So, as I said, one of the biggest challenges, and it's something that President Lula has just mentioned, is this is about uniting the country. So that will be certainly his biggest challenge coming January.
It's a polarisation we seem to be seeing right around the world at the moment with in politics, particularly in presidential style races for the president-elect. He is something of a known entity in Brazil. He's been on the scene for quite some time, hasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, anyone who is, let's say, he started in politics in the late 70s. As in unions, so really coming from the bottom up, and he was involved in Brazil's redemocratization process. He tried to be president for 3 times in the late 80s and 90s, and then became president of Brazil one in 2002 and then again in 2006. So it's impossible for someone basically to not know who Lula is. So this election was also quite unique because both candidates were running on their previous platforms, right? You have the incumbent Jair Bolsonaro, president now for another 2 months, and Lula, who had been president also for two mandates, 2 tenures. There weren't really great surprises. So I think in this sense, it was harder for some people to really change their minds because they had a very specific view and saying, this has been my experience with this government. So it wasn't necessarily about a projection or looking towards what if, but looking actually back and saying, which government do I think did a better job for the country?
So if we are looking back, let's look back at the last presidential term. What legacy does Jair Bolsonaro leave Brazil?
It depends who you ask. So let's put it like this. If you are someone who likes Bolsonaro, you'll say that he left a legacy of being the first president to really embrace religion in his political platform. Someone who is a very, very hardcore nationalist. Some people really appreciate that. And someone with very conservative values, socially conservative values, which I think it's something that Brazil hadn't seen in a very, very long time. However, if you are someone who does not like Bolsonaro, basically you'll see him destroyed, as someone who has destroyed Brazil's image in the world, as someone who has embarrassed Brazilians living abroad, given his statements. But most importantly, I think as someone who really is responsible for this division, whether it's fair, which one has the better case. But what you see when you talk to Brazilians is that the tendency is to be very, very passionate of both love, but especially hatred towards towards Bolsonaro or towards Lula. It's hard to find more contained analyses because this is something that the debates that have been going on, they've really gone to the core of what people believe is a good government, what people believe a country should look like, and ultimately what values a country and a country's leaders should promote.
And just finally, what does this mean for Brazil's, I guess, positioning on the world stage? It is an incredibly large country, both in terms of population, but also its economy. It is a G20 nation. Will there be a repositioning of how Brazil is portraying itself on the global stage?
I would say that's actually going to be one of the most visible things that are going to take place in terms, if you think of foreign policy as public policy, it's going to be one of the biggest turnarounds that we're going to see. Lula is someone who is, whether you like him or not, he is extremely charismatic. He is someone who has been in this position before. And I think he, more than any other president in Brazil, he has really used foreign policy and Brazil's image to really increase Brazil's soft power and Brazil's presence in the world stage. And the place that I would tell most Australians also to be paying attention to is really a big shift in the Amazon, in the management of the Amazon. So I think that's probably going to be one of the very first things that Lula is going to invest in his foreign policy, in this sort of under a new management, if you will, is to put Brazil in a much bigger leadership position when it comes to deforestation and climate change.
And it's certainly an area that it seems like Australia's Prime Minister's already picked up on with that tweet of congratulations to the President-elect. Dr. Deborah Farias, thank you so much for joining us on Afternoon Briefing.
Thank you for having me.
Well, earlier in the program,